On this week's podcast, Timmy and I have the distinct honor of interviewing Attorney General Jonathan Skremetti of the great state of Tennessee. His name will forever live with the case that we're about to discuss called U.S. versus Skrmetti. Bald,
blind,
and buddies. Timmy, we're doing an interview today, so it's a little bit different for you and me, but gosh, am I excited about this upcoming interview. I can't tell you how excited I am.
Yeah. It's, what is it, a Tuesday? Are we recording?
It's Tuesday, yep. And you want to tell folks about who we're about to talk to in just a few moments here?
Yeah, Attorney General Skrmetti of Tennessee, who was a defendant, right, in a case that went to the Supreme Court. So we'll talk to him. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, the case, people always identify the Supreme Court cases by the first name. Roe versus Wade, they always just shorten it to Roe and so forth. Because it was United States versus Skrmetti, the case name has been sort of bequeathed as Skrmetti. So we'll ask him, actually, is that a good thing, a bad thing? Do you want to live like that? Yeah. So that'll be interesting, but I can't tell you how excited I am. But, in the interest of time, let me give the trivia answer from last week. I'll give you a trivia question this week, and then we'll jump right into the interview. How's that sound, Tim?
Sounds good. I have a couple cities. Let's see how many I can get.
Okay, so the question that I asked, and again, I'm a baseball fanatic, right, is there are currently 5 teams that are playing in a state capital, have their stadium in a state capital. 4 are pretty obvious. The 5th is, I wouldn't say it's a trick, but if you follow baseball, you'd know the answer. So go ahead, Timmy, give me your guesses.
So Minneapolis, St. Paul?
Nope.
Oh, man, Sacramento?
Nope. Sacramento. Now, that's the tough one. How did you get that first?
I don't know.
So the Oakland A's left Oakland. They're on their way to Las Vegas. They're ultimately building a new stadium there, and they need temporary housing. And they went north from Oakland to Sacramento. So they are actually playing their baseball this season, and I think it's next season as well, if I'm not mistaken, in a minor league baseball stadium in Sacramento, California.
Okay.
So that's funny you got that. But the other ones are pretty obvious. The
Tempe?
Boston Red Sox.
Oh, Boston. Okay.
Boston Red Sox.
Yep.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Then there's the Atlanta Braves. They're playing in the state capital of Georgia. There are the Colorado Rockies, who play in the fair city of Denver, the Mile High City. And the newest one would be the Arizona Diamondbacks.
Diamondbacks in Tempe, Arizona, right?
Phoenix.
Oh, Phoenix. Man, I had that off. I don't know.
Yeah, Phoenix is the capital of Arizona. But why don't we, in the interest of time, because we'll spend the additional time on the interview with the good General Skremetti coming up here shortly. Without further ado, it is my honor to introduce one of the great gets, I would say, in politics today, which is his name is forever linked to the case. It's U.S. versus Skrmetti. Joining us today is the Honorable Jonathan Skremetti, Attorney General of the great state of Tennessee. So welcome, General Skremetti. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to 2 college buddies, and thank you again, sir.
Thank you very much.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And in my outreach to you, sir, you really struck a chord with me because you had talked about, democracy is dependent upon differing opinions and people discussing and things of that nature. And I don't want to, necessarily violate your trust by reading what you wrote, but it was quite touching. And I think you actually believe that, right, sir? As do Timmy and I. So.
Yeah, I mean, like we have inherited this incredible country, and we run it, and we have to not just run it well and wisely, but we need to run it in a way that propagates all the good values that were handed to us, so that our kids and their kids and their kids can enjoy these benefits.
Huh. And tell us a little bit about your academic background. We'll get into that in a second. And the reason I do that is just to be obnoxious, because as you may know from my outreach, Timmy and I lived next door to each other freshman year in Dillon Hall at Notre Dame. And how do you know somebody went to Notre Dame, Timmy? Tell them the answer.
They tell you in the first 5 minutes, right?
Yeah. So why don't you tell us, you're quite an impressive record as well. You Harvard Law grad, correct?
Yeah. I was really lucky. I went to George Washington for undergrad. Had a great time there. It's right in the heart of DC, and there were just lots of opportunities to hear from interesting people coming through. Had some great friends there that are still friends. And then from there, I was nominated for a Rhodes Scholarship, did not get it, emphatically did not get it.
Me either. Me either.
Timmy didn't either, sir.
Yeah.
So, but he was nominated. I was the one that was not nominated.
But yeah, they had this great consolation prize. This wonderful woman had endowed an opportunity for kids to go to Oxford for a couple of years. So I was able to go over there anyway, and I did 2 years studying philosophy, politics, and economics, and then
PPE,
Harvard
yeah.
Law School after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. England is quite the country, is it not, sir? I did my graduate work over there. It's, we actually, a buddy of mine came who was living in New York at that time. And as it happened, I have 2 friends who came and visited, one from San Francisco, one from New York. Those are probably, along with, say, Tokyo and some other cities that you can throw out there, some of the most expensive places in the world, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they came over to visit me in 1999, 2000, and to a man, they both said, God, this place is expensive, London. But the reason I bring that up is when my buddy came from New York, we made it up to Oxford. And it just so happened we happened to walk in when they were having the all-English ping pong championship in some pub in Oxford. I just, that's always my memory of Oxford. What was your favorite memory from Oxford? Did you have one?
Oh man, I mean, the people from all over the world, you understand what you have so much better when you have a chance to compare it with other places. And so, in Oxford, it's very interdisciplinary. Yeah. So in law school, all you're talking to is other law students. Over there, my best friends were an astrophysicist, a medical student, a chemist, mathematician, all these people. Yeah, there was a law student too, but all these people studying different things. And so instead of talking about what you're learning, you just talk like normal people, and you really get a sense of what the other parts of the world are like and what makes people tick.
Yeah, we have this assumption that the American mind is throughout the world, right? And unfortunately, some of that we're spreading. But it's good to be in touch with those kinds of other thoughts, isn't there?
Oh yeah, and I mean, I was a fierce jingoist over there, so I got a lot of arguments about how America was doing it right and other people weren't.
I can relate to that, General Skremetti. I found the English to be unbelievably astute at somehow or another shifting blame. You Americans. It's like, well, I seem to remember that, World War II was won because we Americans, Right. I would say that one of my favorite jokes when I was over there is I'd ask people, because they'd find out I was American, you ignorant American and such. And I'd say, are you fluent in German? And they'd say no. And I'd say, well, you're welcome. So that was always kind of, that shut down the conversation.
Yeah, I bet they love that one. Yeah.
But anyhow, General Skremetti, were you always headed to law school, or was it just something that you kind of fell into? Because I was trying to triple major at one point with politics, philosophy, and economics. So I think our minds are similar in that sense. But Timmy knows this. After my kids are off to school, I would love to just go back to law school just for the intellectual challenge, the rigor. Justice Bork got himself into a lot of hot water back in the 80s. We're old enough to remember when they said, why do you want to be on the Supreme Court? And he said it'd be an intellectual feast. Mm-hmm. And people took that the wrong way. But that's kind of how I see it. What drove you to the law? Why the law, and why Attorney General of Tennessee now, sir?
Well, I mean, I was always inclined toward law school. I mean, I thought about other things. At one point, I thought about being a philosophy professor. Really glad I didn't do that. I'd done some computer work and thought that might be an option. But I love history. I love American history. Always have. And the law is a way that you can be a little part of American history. I mean, the law is continuous, going way, 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 way back, through England, through Rome. But, from the Revolution on, we've done some great things with American law. And it's not the be all end all, but it's important. It's a way to contribute as a professional to making the country a better place. And, I always thought it was interesting and fun, and you get a chance to think and argue and read and write. And, you can do that in the service of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, and thinking and reading and writing recently could involve the Supreme Court case, right? U.S. v. Skrmetti, with your name on it. Can you give us your thoughts about...
What did you say earlier, Tim? He's up there with People versus
Larry Flint. Yeah. Marbury versus Madison. And
Marbury versus Madison, Larry versus Flint.
I mean... it's crazy. I was really surprised. This was the first case where I was the defendant, and it came in, and I've been a lawyer for a long time, about 20 years. And I used to be a federal prosecutor, so I would write the complaints, United States versus whoever. Yeah. And it was really jarring to see my name in the defendant's spot. It's really weird now. Case came down. It's been a pretty significant case. and I've got a pretty unusual name. I'm not used to seeing it just kind of pop up here and there. And now there are a lot of people with a lot of opinions, and I'm seeing these headlines just, organically while I read through stuff. It's like Skrmetti kills kids, and, why Skrmetti is the worst thing ever. And it's a little disconcerting. But it's a great case. I mean, of all the causes to be associated with, I believe very strongly that we've gone off the rails as a country. And, the Supreme Court's decision here seems to have been a real inflection point in bringing people back towards a more evidence-based, less ideological approach to dealing with people who are suffering through some really difficult circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Timmy, what did you say? What was the number of edge cases as a psychiatrist? And again,
there's probably a small number of edge cases whereby, in my opinion as a psychiatrist, whereby, hormones or puberty blockers might make sense for kids. But basically the data on puberty blockers is based on very small sample size. And there are clear risks and downsides. And so, I think it makes sense to put the brakes on broad scale use of them for sure. So
why don't we remind people, if you'd be so kind, General Skremetti, why don't you just give sort of the 10,000-foot overview of U.S. versus Skrmetti, what it ultimately was, and then I'll talk about the decision. It was 6-3, so pretty resounding victory. Congratulations on that. And the question essentially was, does the Equal Protection Clause apply?
Isn't he supposed to talk about the case?
Yeah, well, no, he's going to tell us the ins and outs. General Skremetti, you can tell why I want to be a lawyer. The only time I want to have people talk is so I can interrupt them. So I apologize.
Well, you really want to be a judge then.
Now, remember, this is on tape, sir. So, just be careful.
We could edit if needed.
So Tennessee prohibited the use of puberty blockers, hormone treatments, and surgeries for gender transition purposes for minors. And we were immediately sued by the ACLU, by the Biden administration. We duked it out. There have been other states that passed similar laws. Their laws had been enjoined as violations of the Equal Protection Clause. Ours was in the trial court, and then we did an emergency motion to the Court of Appeals to lift the injunction so our law would go into effect. And we won. We were the first state to ever win in one of these cases. And then after we won on sort of the broader injunction question, then the Biden administration and the ACLU asked the Supreme Court to take the case. And this was the first constitutional case looking at gender identity issues that the court had ever taken. Now, ultimately, they decided that this wasn't a classification based on gender identity, that it was purely looking at classification based on age and medical purpose. But it was still a significant move in an area where there's been really unsettled law, really unsettled science, a lot of controversy. This brings at least a little bit of clarity, and it says that the elected officials of the people are allowed to make policy decisions in this area, as there's a lot of contested evidence out there.
And the old notion that states are laboratories of democracy, this is the essence of federalism, is it not, General Skremetti? Which is, I think it's nearly 24, correct me if I'm wrong in the exact numbers, but it's over 20 states still allow this type of medicine for transgender youth, right? So, if it just so happens you live in Tennessee, you can still access it in California, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to say there are about 27 states that prohibit it, and there are more states considering that. But, that's part of the way federalism works. I mean, different states move at different paces. Obviously, there's a significant federal overlay here with, health regulations and funding, and we're seeing a lot of action on that front now. But, ordinarily the states make their own decisions, and that tends to be a process that creates better results. You do get to experiment. You do get to see what works best. Some states get to move fast and pave the way for everybody else. And this is an area, regulation of medicine is something that states have been doing for centuries. And so this is not like an unusual overreach by the state. This is protecting kids, regulating medicine. These are core state activities that are, constantly handled by state governments.
Yeah, like during the COVID pandemic, I was seeing a lot of people virtually, and I would have to look up to see which states waived their COVID requirement for you to be licensed in that state to see somebody who went back home. Because, I'd always tell my patients that the states deserve the right to say what physicians practice there. And it's the same sort of thing, that the state has an obligation and a right there, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, it's the state government's job. The federal government is a government of limited powers, and it's obviously the superior government, but only in that narrow window where it is the appropriate government. Most law, most regulation happens at the state level.
General Skremetti, I have a two-part question, if you'll indulge me, and perhaps you can explain Bostock. I'll use it as reference because you and I know what I'm talking about, but perhaps the audience does not. And please consider the dozens and dozens of people that are listening. Some are lawyers, and in fact, one of my close buddies who's a lawyer, he's a University of Michigan grad. He called out a couple things about Bostock that he wanted to ask me. But if you'll indulge me, the first thing is I'm torn. I have 3 children. I believe you have children as well. I think you have 4, having read your dossier. But the reason I bring that up is Justice Sotomayor, in her dissent, specifically called out the rights of parents. And is this infringing on the rights of parents? That's question 1. How do you respond to that? And then secondarily, how do you square the ruling in U.S. versus Skrmetti? And just putting all my cards on the table here, Timmy and I have talked about this at length. I tend to be a liberal, classic small L with a libertarian bent. And yet I happen to agree with the ruling here. The question that I have is, how do you square it with Bostock? What is the differentiation as you see it? So those are the 2 questions, if you will, sir.
Sure. So with respect to the parental rights, there's a lot of latitude for parental rights. We saw the Mahmoud decision this year from the Supreme Court, but there are also limits. I mean, if a parent wants to let their child start producing pornography at age 15, the state will rightfully come in and throw them in jail for that. You're not allowed to do that. If your kid wants to get a tattoo in many states, you're not allowed to say, well, I want them to have a tattoo so they can get a tattoo.
Is that right? I did not know that. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a recognition that there are long-term consequences to decisions that kids can make that, because of the profound impact on the kids, parental consent isn't enough. And, given the extraordinarily permanent effects even of puberty blockers. I mean, there are significant risks of lifelong significant harms from extended puberty blocker usage. This is an area where the kids can't consent, and the states have looked at the evidence and found a strong basis for being concerned that the kids are making decisions that they're going to have to bear the consequences of forever. And with respect to the second question, so Bostock was looking at Title VII. It was a statutory interpretation case. So it's looking at the specific language dealing with sex discrimination in a particular provision of federal law relating to employment. The court looked at that and found that, because you could not treat somebody differently because of their transgender status, but for their sex, that it all reduces down to sex discrimination. Now, there is a robust argument about whether the court got this right or not. There are a lot of people out there with very strong arguments to the contrary, but the court ruled. The decision is done. That is what the law is for now, and there's no reason to think that's going to change anytime soon. But in this case, you're looking at a constitutional question. You are looking at the broader question of the state treating kids differently because their biology is different. So the idea that, if you're a boy and you get testosterone, that's legal, but if you're a girl and you can't get testosterone, that's a constitutional violation. That's the argument that the other side was making, and it just doesn't square with real life. I mean, people don't go to a doctor and say, give me testosterone. They go to a doctor because they have a particular condition they're concerned about, or at least they're worried that they have a condition. The doctor diagnoses, the doctor treats the condition. We don't just hand out drugs willy-nilly. I mean, there are situations where you might be able to get morphine, say if you're in intense pain, but there are other situations where you can't get morphine because, say, you want to end your life. You don't just have a universal right to whatever drugs you want. It's not a consumer economy, no matter how much advertising we see in this space. You still need doctors to look at it and give specific treatments for specific conditions. And so I think there's a world of difference between sort of the broad employment litigation or employment discrimination protections where, the whatever indicators of gender that you might accoutre yourself with don't really matter for doing your job versus a situation where what treatments you get hinge in terms of their effect and their effectiveness on your specific biology. I think there's a really big distinction there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The thing I've always asked myself, and I don't have a good answer to this, is if, for example, a person who was born a female wants testosterone, there's some presumption in the way folks think of this that they're already sort of trans in mind, right? They're already male. But we don't give male brains testosterone because you give a male brain testosterone and guys get rageful and other things, unless they're deficient. And so it's just fascinating that we're giving the hormone that people think they already are developed in line with, if that makes sense. I've never totally been able to figure that out.
Yeah, there's been a lot of movement in this space, right? I mean, there have always been people with gender dysphoria. It's not, it's not a new thing. It's not a made up thing. There are people who really genuinely, painfully struggle with this, but the numbers have just exploded. I mean, 4,000+% increases in the number of kids seeking medical treatment here. Yeah. And we don't understand why the numbers are so high. And, the nature of the treatments is obviously significant, right? You're talking about lifelong changes to somebody's body, and the high
sterility too.
Yeah, no, I mean potential sterility, cognitive developmental issues, cancer issues, and the Dutch protocol, which was sort of the original scientific basis for this, had some very high barriers, and they would make it available to kids, but they really had to jump through a lot of hoops. You had to eliminate comorbidities. There was a lengthy waiting process. Now there's a lot of evidence out there that kids would just show up at a clinic and say, hey, I feel like I'm in the wrong body, and immediately walk out with a prescription, which is really tough to square with any of the science.
So when I was at the University of Wisconsin, they were adults, but they got us together to have a meeting on how to do gender affirming care. And the goal was one visit, you get a letter in support of your identity. And they said the goal is to make it as easy as getting a referral to have your ACL repaired on a skiing accident. And it's like, an ACL repair is an obvious physically diagnosable ailment with a definitive surgery, and it was amazing to me that was the held up standard, and this is for consenting adults, which is different, but I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, the plaintiffs' lawyers are going to get involved in this, and we're going to find out just how slippery everything was.
Yeah.
Bill Maher, who hosts Real Time with Bill Maher, he said, and he and I tend to be politically aligned on a lot of things, and he said something along the lines of, if there was as many people that had quote unquote gender dysphoria or that were in need of puberty blockers and things of that nature, why are there not the same numbers in, for instance, Youngstown, Ohio, as he encounters in the South California, Southern California, so to speak? Basically saying it's not uncommon to have a dinner here with someone with a child who's transitioning. It's not to say that these people aren't suffering, that there may legitimately be people with gender dysphoria that need this, but that, the numbers, to your point, General, have exploded. It just seems, and maybe that's what you were hinting at with the plaintiffs' lawyers. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have any sort of rigor in terms of gatekeeping these really powerful and irreversible treatments. Folks are just, handing them out like candy, maybe overstating it. I'm not sure. Maybe they are just handing it out like candy. There are very low barriers to getting these treatments. And, the evidence has been horrifically skewed. I mean, there's been incredible ideological manipulation of all of the underlying science, the WPATH guidelines, the gold standard here.
Timmy's talked about that before.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a bad scene.
And to be fair, General Skremetti, at our age, because I know you're younger than Timmy and I, we probably shouldn't be getting candy anyway, right? So,
So I'm regularly told, yes.
Hey, real quick, on a personal level, how are you dealing with? Because I respect the hell out of listening to you. I really do. I appreciate it more than you know, and I happen to agree with the judicial decision. How do you deal though with the blowback? Skremetti's killing kids. You're the father of 4. I mean, how do you deal with that, or you just kind of brush it off? It's part of the job.
I mean, I don't want to kill kids. I worry about, I read stuff, but generally it's just rehashing the WPATH guidelines or, looking at data that I know is deliberately skewed, or it's purely, just venting emotional non-evidence-based opinion. It's a little bit weird though, but I mean, if you're in America today and you have any sort of public-facing position, like you're exposed to withering criticism from some really mean people. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do. If you're the dog catcher, there's probably a hate group on Facebook or Instagram or something.
Yeah, don't go after dogs. We all agree on that, though. Yeah, maybe that's not the best.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not the first time people have said mean things about me, but it's a little weird in that my name is kind of the catch-all term for this big disagreement at the moment.
Yeah.
And there's probably something to the fact that you have such a unique name that it resonates as well, right, sir?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's not too many of us.
No.
I've got my cousin's wife is a comedian who's been increasingly successful, and fortunately, she's she appeals to like church moms and to a more religious crowd. If she was on the other side of the political spectrum, I'm afraid I might have killed her career. But her book is probably doing all right as a result of this. I hope it is anyway. So there's not too many of us, so it is really weird to suddenly be talked about in the third person in things that I read in the course of everyday life.
Hey, Timmy, just for our listeners, before you ask the next question, why don't you just remind people what the WPATH
So the WPATH is touted as the set of professional standards for transgender healthcare. However, in recent years, it sort of has had a turnover and become more of an advocacy body, I think it's fair to say, using interlocking connections with other organizations to get their standards endorsed and things like that. There's an interesting leak of internal WPATH documents, which was fascinating, about what WPATH people say when they don't think anybody's listening, about how kids don't understand what they're facing, can't consent, about real consequences. It's a fascinating thing, but I think it's a perfect example of ideological capture.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Hey, General, go ahead. Ask your question to General Skremetti, Timmy, because I've got two more. I don't want to keep the General. He's got more important things than talking to two.
Sure. I guess, so here's as a non-law citizen, I guess the thing that I'm asking myself is, if gender identity and sex are both protected classes, let's just say they are, I don't feel like you can simultaneously protect both for all, right? You put a transgender person on a sports team, the biological women may lose. You don't put them on, the transgender person perceives a loss. Like, I guess I see this inherent conflict in the way things are set up right now. And I'm curious your thought on the law and the theory, if that makes sense. Or
no, that is a huge point that has not really been explored. But in the context of like locker rooms and bathrooms and sports teams, it's coming to a head. And I don't understand how we got to where we were. I mean, because you have one side saying it's a Title IX violation if you don't let biological boys in the girls' locker room. Another side saying it's a violation if you do. One of them has to be wrong. We have legislation that was passed explicitly prohibiting sex discrimination. It's hard to read that in a way that says, well, we actually have to allow what used to be considered sex discrimination because gender identity discrimination also has to be prohibited. I mean, it's just, it doesn't work. And Bostock actually is a great example here because it is built entirely on the foundation of a sex binary. It's saying you've got men, you've got women. If a man dresses like a woman, he's still a man, and you can't treat him differently because of the way he's, dressed. You're still looking at one of two sexes, and there has to be equal treatment there. That's very different than the construct that a lot of people have been pushing involving, broader protections for gender identity. And I at some point, it's just a completely different set of rules. I mean, it does not fit together with the existing legal apparatus.
Both can't be right, as you say?
Or simultaneously protected equally, at least, right?
Yeah, one has to take precedence over the other. Yeah. And, in my opinion, that ought to be the one that's actually written in the law.
General, Bostock is actually going to open, again, a two-part question, if it's okay by you, sir, which is Justice Gorsuch wrote that opinion. And in dissent, Justice Alito said you're basically trying to use textualism to justify. And so my question to you is, has anybody, because Gorsuch and in many ways Justice Kavanaugh as well as Justice Barrett have surprised me. And I'm curious if there's any justice that really has surprised you first and foremost. And secondarily, referring to Justice Alito's point, is there a particular judicial philosophy that you ascribe to? You know, Antonin Scalia was the first to really sort of push for originalism. Others are now calling it textualism. Is there a particular judicial philosophy, or are you just sort of one of those? I don't mean to minimize it, sir, and you know, human beings are complex, but is there a particular judicial philosophy by which you try to guide your decisions?
Yeah. So in terms of the justices that have surprised me, you know, Justice Barrett at the argument was asking questions that were, I don't know if sympathetic to the other side is right, but you know, she was really trying to ask some questions to get her bearings in this whole situation, and she came out with a very strong concurrence, you know, stronger than the majority opinion.
Yeah.
And I thought it was very well articulated. And
do you suppose that has to do with the fact that she has 7 children and was seeing it as a mother?
It could. Well,
I don't mean to minimize it down to something so simple, but I was wondering that because I did actually hear the oral. It's not.
I mean, she's a very sharp jurist. I mean, if you read her CASA opinion, like she thinks things through deeply, and as Notre Dame guys, you probably appreciate. You know, she comes from a very rigorous intellectual tradition there.
Yeah, of course.
So
well done,
you know,
General Skremetti. Butter up the host. I appreciate it.
Only a little bit. So you know, I think she's the most interesting justice in terms of watching her continue to articulate her jurisprudence. There's a lot of neat stuff going on in a lot of different areas of law, and you know, her academic background, I think, gives her a chance to dig deep and pull out some pretty interesting first principles. In terms of judicial philosophy, you know, the fundamental principle of America is the people rule. And so when you're looking at the Constitution, it only matters because the people ratified it. And any court that's applying the Constitution needs to realize that they're using the borrowed authority and borrowed legitimacy that come from the people's approval, and recognize that where the Constitution is in tension with what the people's elected representatives are doing, you know, there's a significant issue there. I mean, it's always looking back to the popular sovereignty, which is complicated because we have the Constitution and we have the more transient laws. But to that end, I think originalism makes a lot of sense because you're looking at what did it mean when the people voted for this provision. And then when you're looking at more modern laws, you're looking at statutory interpretation, you want to look to the text and understand it as it was understood at the time it was passed. Because it's the people's understanding of the laws that breathe life into them. If you're coming up with a creative reading that is completely foreign to what somebody who voted for it or who read about it in the paper at the time it was passed would have understood, then you know that's alienating the law from the will of the people in a way that undermines the overall legitimacy of the system.
Timmy, if you'll indulge me for a second, I'm gonna be a nerd with General Skremetti.
Okay.
Do you give any value to the congressional deliberations and things that were discussed as the laws were being crafted, or are you sort of, as Antonin Scalia used to say, the word is dead, print is dead. You know, what was said is what was said, so to speak. How do you come down on splitting that difference? I won't go too deep because I could talk to you for hours about this.
So I think to the extent that you can understand what terms meant, you can look to the debate as well as other contemporary sources just to get an idea of what the language means. So if there's a word and you're not totally sure, you know, what exactly it means, you can look at the context it came up with in legislative debate, and use that as a tool for statutory interpretation. But people were gaming this so much. You know, they'd have a law, and then one congressman would get up and read something into the record that said something totally different than what the law says, and the courts would turn around and say, well, I mean, this congressman said it means this, and who are we to disagree? And the whole point is, like, the law is what everybody votes on and the president signs. So if you start looking outside that for meaning, unless you're trying to figure out, like, the basic, you know, the linguistic aspect of it, understanding what the words mean, you know, you're kind of undermining the process. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too, when we come to these unsettled questions or new domains, right? It seems like in some areas of thought, the response is the law needs to settle this out, right? The judicial branch. But I think, as SB1 demonstrated here, legislators and the people should have the power to settle unsettled things. And then the court, looks over that, I guess, or it sees if that interferes with the Constitution. But I feel like sometimes the legal route is taken as a shortcut, right?
Well, it's easy. I mean, it's hard when you have to vote on controversial things. And so there's a lot of incentive to punt, whether it's to agencies or whether it's to the courts. But at the end of the day, we've really seen our democratic muscles atrophy. Like, we need to be able to disagree. We need to be able to hammer out compromises and figure out answers that work. If it's just a matter of the courts and the regulators, you're going to see this ping pong effect, or people will feel like the game is totally rigged against them and lose faith. Right. We are a self-governing people, and if we are not governing ourselves, we're not going to remain a self-governing people. So, we got to get in there and mix it up with each other.
Yeah. General Skremetti, am I hearing that you're in support of overturning the Chevron?
Oh yeah, no. The one job that the courts have is to say what the law is, right? Going back to Marbury versus Madison, that is emphatically the domain of the courts. So when the court said, "Well, we're going to let the agencies tell us what the law means," it was an abrogation of judicial authority. So I've been against Chevron for 23 years. I think it was, I was in administrative law, and I said, this just cannot be right. And my professor thought it was so cute because Chevron was carved into stone at that point.
And it was written by, of all people, Antonin Scalia, right?
Yeah, so, it was the conservative position. It was originally a way of reining in courts that had gotten out over their skis. And so it was a way of saying, well, the president's elected, so, if you're giving the agencies deference, at least there's some attenuated connection to democracy.
Right. That the president appointed the heads of the agencies and such. And,
yeah. But we saw it abused so badly. And at the end of the day, if everybody's doing what they're not supposed to do, you can't fix it. If you have courts doing what they're supposed to do, then Chevron is an abomination. And I think we've seen, the judiciary understand a little bit better what its role is and the limitations on what it can do. And that made it inevitable that Chevron would go away.
And can you guys just, for our listeners, in a nutshell, describe Chevron?
I will allow the great general to do so. I'm not going to presuppose. Go ahead, sir.
So Chevron is the idea that if you're looking at what a law means, then you look to the agency's interpretation of the law that they are enforcing, and as long as it's a reasonable interpretation, then the courts defer to what the agencies say. Ordinarily, if you're looking at a law and wondering what it means, the court tells you what it means. You put your arguments in, the judge tells you here's the answer. So it was a very strange deviation where they were saying these agencies that are out there enforcing this are also the ones that are interpreting the language that says what they can enforce.
Right. So there's no check or balance necessary. They're their own check and balance.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was, as long as they're basically saying in a nutshell that if it was a reasonable interpretation and a reasonable application of the statutory reading, that it was acceptable, basically, because the idea was that these agencies are the experts in these fields and there's so much ambiguity. But to your point earlier about your muscles atrophying, sir, one of my favorite writers is George Will of the Washington Post. And he pulls no punches talking about how Congress is the Article I branch and should reassert that authority as soon as humanly possible. So.
Yeah, I mean, every time I hear something about tariffs, I'm like, well, where does that power rest, right? I find it fascinating. So.
And one last question for me, General, before I let you go, because I'd be remiss if I did not. You don't become the Attorney General of Tennessee with a Harvard law degree unless you have aspirations. And from the basis of this interview, you'd have my vote, sir. I'll tell you that. But
I appreciate
have aspirations for higher office.
Honestly, in Tennessee, the Supreme Court picks the Attorney General. It's a very different process. And when they opened
for 6 years, right, sir?
8
years. Yeah, no, it's awesome. It's phenomenal. 8-year term. I'm until 2030. But
good work if you can get it, right?
Oh, it's the best legal job in America. But when it opened up, there was a 2-week application window. I spent the first week trying to talk someone else into putting in for the job, and I was convinced on the back end that I ought to apply, and got my application in with 29 minutes to spare.
You quite literally had to submit an application like you're on LinkedIn.
No, you can find it online, and then the court does interviews. So there's a YouTube out there. It's like 6 hours of the court interviewing all the different applicants.
Get out, really?
Wow. Yeah, it's wild. And I really fell backwards into this job. I mean, when I moved to Tennessee, I thought I was going to be a career federal prosecutor, and I'd retire with a bunch of great war stories. So, this is not some grand scheme of ambition. This is like God's unbelievable sense of humor that I have this incredible job. I really, really, really lucked out.
What a great story.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Timmy, did you have some final questions for the Attorney General? I don't want to take too much of his time. I know he's probably got to get back to doing the people's work, as it were.
Yeah, no, I think I got it because you asked about, because I'm always curious about the personal toll, when civility has sort of left much of the public space, like, how you cope. And I thought that was a very, thoughtful way to handle that. Skremetti's a common name out there now.
At least people know how to spell it.
Yeah.
What nationality is that, sir?
Croatian.
I was going to guess Middle Eastern. Okay, so I wasn't terribly far off. Well, General Skremetti, as a rule, we always have an opportunity. We give this to our guests. Timmy and I, just in good fun, each week we'll call out our whack job of the week and our hero of the week. At the beginning of the podcast, you had mentioned that you had a hero you'd like to call out, and I'll give you the floor now, sir.
Yeah. So there was the stabbing at Walmart, I guess over the weekend, and there were a number of people that responded and stopped the stabber. I know one name that I've seen is Derek Perry. My understanding is there were a few people that were involved, but that's how things should work. People need to step up and protect one another. And it's horrible what happened, but it's such a great thing that there were a group of Americans that just stood up and said, we're not going to put up with this. We're going to protect everybody else. We're going to stop this guy. And they had the means to do it. There were a number of armed folks there. So really grateful for them doing what they did.
General, no more needs to be said. That is a fabulous.
Yeah. Was that the one in Traverse City, Michigan, by the way?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, I'm going there in 2 days. That's where my folks live, just outside of there. So it's got a personal.
And General Skremetti, just so you know, Timmy's not driving. I'll just put that
not this time. Not this time.
Yeah.
I bet you get a lot of mileage out of that joke.
Yeah.
Yeah. On personal note, I have to tell you, sir, I found your expertise to be fabulous. I would love to have you back on if you'd be willing. It's just interesting, fun. You were very laid back and not at all what I anticipated. So I really do genuinely appreciate it, sir. So thank you very much.
And if you're ever throwing your hat in the political ring, just give us a call. We'll help launch for what it's worth.
I'll be your speechwriter.
We'll get you on the podcast.
I really appreciate it. I wouldn't hold your breath on that, but it's extremely kind of you to say so.
Yeah. And by the way, if you can get me transferred down to Tennessee, I had a chance to be in your fair state in Nashville last year for a party my buddies.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on here. Tennessee's a happening state these days. We got the world's biggest supercomputer. We got a lot going on. Nashville's
Jim Nance, for God's sake, with all his money in the golf channel, the golf guy, he lives there now with his wife.
It's a good place to be.
Nashville. It sure heck seems like it. Are you from there originally, sir?
I actually grew up in Connecticut. I joined DOJ, and they kept sending me to Memphis over and over, and I stuck.
I heard Memphis is not the greatest place to be, though.
It is a great place, but it's also a great place to be a prosecutor. I mean, it's got its downsides, but it's going to come back. It's on a good trajectory. XAI is investing massively there, and that's causing some local controversy, but it's huge amounts of money, huge amounts of AI infrastructure going in. It's got a really bright future.
Oh, cool.
Are you a fan of the Babylon Bee? Have you ever read it?
Oh, I love the Babylon Bee.
It's a little bit too conservative for me, a little bit too religious. I tend not to be religious. I have 16 years of Catholic school. It just made me angry at organized religion. But to that point, one of my favorites is Motorcyclist, who identifies as bicyclist, breaks all the bicycle records.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
They have a pithy way of getting right to the heart of things.
They do.
Yeah, they do indeed. They do indeed. Well, General, thank you so much. And anytime you want to come on, we would be honored. So
awesome.
Really appreciate
I'll be back.
Yeah. Right. I appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
Timmy, I have to tell you, Attorney General Skrmetti, part of it is because he is an attorney. He is our age. What a laid back, casual fellow, right? I mean, just very, very impressive, obviously. And he didn't need to toot it.
Yeah.
The horn didn't need to be tooted. So that was great. And we'd love to have him back. It was an honor. So. But listen, Timmy, you have a great week. And this is John Bolin signing off saying, hey, misbehave, drive fast, take chances.
Yep. A wonderful interview. And I would imagine the general would agree. This is Tim saying, if everybody likes what you're doing, you're probably not doing anything worthwhile. Take care out there.